Hello, you're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Ali Milani.
And me, Zoe Grunewald.
Zoe, looking very, very different today. Is everything all right?
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Nice hat. Okay, well, well then, coming up on today's show, we will be discussing the government's latest immigration crackdowns with Zoe Gardner. Afterwards, it's Labour's tax troubles, from Angela Rayner's second home to Rachel Reeves' budget build-up. James Meadway will be joining us to break down Labour's tax problems.
As always, you can find us at Politics Uncensored UK on social media. All that and more coming up later on the programme.
But first, it's the Week Unwrapped. Hugh, let's introduce you properly now. Who the hell are you?
Yeah, unsurprisingly, I am not Zoe Grunewald. My name is Hugh Smiley. I am a former Labour Party comms officer, much like yourself. I was a journalist at The New Statesman, and I am the producer for Politics Uncensored.
The wonderful producer for Politics Uncensored.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I've taken a step beyond the desk and am now in the chair.
Yes, and you're going to be joining us for the duration of today's show. And the first thing we're going to talk about is Zack Polanski as the new leader of the Green Party. So the left wing, as he calls himself, eco-populist, Zack Polanski has won a landslide victory to become the new leader of the Green Party. His announcement speech had a strong message for Keir Starmer's Labour Party. We are here to replace you. He won, I think, 85% of the vote, which is what we would call sort of Arab dictator election numbers. But I'm sure this one was definitely legit. Hugh, what do you make of his sort of huge victory?
Yeah, I think the fact that he won was never really a surprise for most people. I think from day one, there was really a sort of mood building around his campaign. He was pushing that sort of like progressive radical politics that the Greens base really, really care about. Meanwhile, we saw Adrian Ramsey and Ellie Chown sort of like almost parroting like Keir Starmer language around the Labour Party. I believe it might have been Ellie Chown who said specifically, we're not a party of protest, which I don't know what you're trying to do to try and win the support of a Green voter, but if your strategy is, we're like Keir Starmer, we want to win, I don't know if that's really going to work. I've personally found it very satisfying seeing, like a strong left-wing voice out on the media since his win, sticking to his sort of principles. How have you found him since you've interviewed him yourself, Ali? What do you think of him so far?
Yeah, so we've had Zack on the show a couple of times, and I think one of the reasons he's won so convincingly, I think, is too much of the sort of political establishment has coalesced in the same sort of space on the political spectrum. And so there seems to be largely an agreement on most issues, or at least the framing of the debate, if that makes sense. So on immigration, on the economy, on the NHS broadly, there isn't a huge lot to differentiate. And that's where Farage has succeeded in. He's been able to come in and break the mold and take a substantively different position. And given people are so frustrated with politics, there is such low trust in the mainstream parties and in politicians, I think he's finding success and will find a little bit of success in being able to break out of that mold. So one of the examples is he went on This Morning Britain, I think, with Ed Balls. And he spoke about immigration, and Ed Balls has become a meme as a result because of his sort of
furious Ed
Balls reaction to it. So I think he's got a lot more space to play with. I mean, the Greens really struggled when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party because they had a lot less space to define themselves in. And that's one of the most important things in politics and political communications, is being able to define who you are, being able to communicate your ideological positions effectively. And it's a lot harder to do that when people are competing in spaces for you. And that's where the Greens struggled with Jeremy Corbyn. That space has been completely opened up for them. And I think he's had a little bit of luck coming in before this Your Party, New Party, this new Corbyn party.
As they're sort of still building up, trying to make something of themselves.
Exactly. He's been able to go first. They did also show that there's been a significant surge in Green Party membership. I think there are about 68,000 members now.
Yeah, I think they're largest ever, I think I saw reported.
Probably, yeah. So, he's going to have some success, but he's also going to have a huge amount of pushback. And we've had him on the show where we talked to him about, are you prepared for the media backlash and the level of media scrutiny that's going to hit you if at any point there is a suspicion that you're going to be a legitimate threat to the mainstream parties. And he said he was, but we'll find out for sure whether he is over the coming weeks, months and years. The Greens came second, I think, in nearly 100 seats around the country. Certainly came second in a wave of seats, I think over 20 or something, in London. So they know clearly what electoral math they're going to be fighting and playing for. But I think it'll be slightly easier for him to define himself. The question will be when this new Corbyn party gets off the ground, if it ever does, which is looking like their conference is going to be at the end of the year. How are they going to battle for that space? They did congratulate him on Twitter, though. Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn congratulated.
Things have been friendly, and I think that's likely to continue. I do think that on sort of Zack Polanski's sort of narrative building that we mentioned earlier, and we talked specifically about Farage sort of being very good at like capturing the public mood and building a narrative out of it. This is something that Zack Polanski's spoken about, I think, multiple times when he talks about that need to actually, establish principles and not always just buy into whatever narrative is being played. Because at the moment, it's pretty reasonable to say that the Labour Party, the Conservatives, that pretty much British politics in general is being driven by whatever framing Nigel Farage wants everyone to think that week. Whereas Zack Polanski said, well, no, our job as the Green Party is to stand up to that and change that narrative of hate into a narrative of hope, whilst acknowledging the problems that everyone's facing.
I mean, the best example of that is the immigration debate. And I know we've got Zoe Gardner on later to talk about the immigration debate, but when you've got Nigel Farage and others like Rupert Lowe and others talking constantly, he's going to get a restraining order of it.
He's getting a restraining order, he's coming on the show. There's only one or the other.
One extreme or the other. When they're constantly talking about immigration, and then the Labour Party goes, immigration is a problem, and we're removing record people, and Keir Starmer is tweeting really, really horrendous stuff. And then Kemi Badenoch is going, I'll deport more people. And Keir Starmer's saying, no, I'll deport more people. And Nigel Farage is saying, no, I'll deport more people. It essentially means that there's a consensus, and that's where he can break the mold a little bit and talk a little bit differently. But we'll see what kind of success he's able to have. What do you think is best case scenario? He said he wants to win 30 seats. Is that possible?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think that what will be important to keep an eye on over the next, coming sort of weeks, months, is how that relationship between the Your Party and the Greens are going to be. Because right now it does look like they're going to be operating on quite a similar platform, right? Perhaps with the Greens just with a greater focus on the climate crisis specifically. But if you think about their sort of like target voter base, the Greens will be moving away from their when we talk about the Green Party generally electorally, they're a weird one to talk about because nationally their image is sort of people like me, young, progressive, woke, lefty, care about climate and social justice issues. But when you look at their local election results and a lot of their MP seats, it's more like sort of people in their like mid 40s, 30s who own a house and don't want a park to be turned into a school.
Yeah, we have a word for them in Westminster, by the way.
Which one's that?
We call them Tories who cycle. So
a classic.
So one of the reasons I was really curious to see the actual breakdown of the votes, was everybody has this view of the Greens being this super left-wing woke party, but I know for a fact that there's a huge proportion of that membership. Wow, I thought there was a huge proportion of that membership that were Tories who cycle, which were actually quite economically conservative. Not like conservative.
It's not because it's like that NIMBYism, right? It's a belief in sort of the preservation of what's around you, not out of a like general belief in like climate issues or the climate crisis. I want to preserve my neighborhood as it is, right?
Yeah.
I do think that it's similar to when we look at the way people analyze sort of Labour under the Corbyn eras, right? We had that influx of membership of young, hopeful, progressive people, and then will that translate into electoral outcomes in areas that aren't sort of traditionally considered in that way? I think, as I was saying earlier, I think the relationship between the Greens and the Your Party is what's going to be important, because if we see them going toe-to-toe, scrapping each other in every single seat that they want to try and win in Brighton, in London, there will be, I think, a less sort of actualized electoral presence from the left than we possibly could.
Yeah. Well, we're going to keep an eye on Zack. That sounds ominous, but Zack, we're going to keep an eye on you over the coming weeks, and we'll certainly have him back into the studio.
That'd be fantastic.
Soon. Next story, Nigel Farage. Parliament is back in session, but no one's told Nigel Farage. Instead, the Reform leader is in the United States, testifying in front of Congress on free speech laws in the UK and palling up with his best friend, Donald Trump. We've seen him talk about how basically make the UK look like North Korea as it pertains to free speech laws. There has been allegations thrown at him that he is trying to convince Donald Trump to put more sanctions on the UK, to hurt the UK further economically. He wasn't there Prime Minister's Question Time, which came up during PMQs this week. Instead, he's in America. He seems to love Congress, and he's been doing a tour out there, basically talking down Britain. Hugh, why does Nigel Farage hate Britain?
I think Nigel this is brutal. It's so much easier when I'm on that side of the table. I think for Nigel Farage, really, I think it's the same thing with like any sort of, very right-wing personality in British politics. They're always desperate, whether it's as a backup option, whether it's just to raise some extra money or just to get that sort of sycophancy to break into the American media market. We saw that with Liz Truss. As soon as things went tits up,
she went to the American
okay, I'm going to go on Ben Shapiro now. Thankfully for all of us, she is sourceless, so she's never going to get that far.
She's not only source, she's like negative source. Like if you share the same space with her, she takes your source away.
The closest to source she can be is like when you like squirt like that ketchup like thing and just like the bit of water comes out and you're like, well, that's nothing. That's actively.
I think she has even less source than that.
Wow.
But let's move off from this.
Yeah. But yeah, I do think part of it as well is when we talk about sort of, a big part of Nigel Farage is tactics of sort of like scaremongering and fearmongering. And the more money he can get from, international donors because they think that the UK is like a failed state, the better for him. The more people in the UK that believe that, London's a no-go zone and the country's fallen apart and it's an authoritarian state, we got to overthrow Keir Starmer now, the better, right? And there is some legitimizing factor in being, going out to America and being in front of Congress and making these statements that may add more credency to what he is trying to push. What have you thought about so far of his sort of American tour, his free speech loving tour?
Well, look, let me tell you, I think it's really interesting in the context of where we are and where we have been this summer. There's been this huge raise the colours movement across Britain about putting the flags up, and no one can be quite convinced of which flag it is, whether it's the Union Jack or the St. George's flag. But there is definitely a drive that is being orchestrated by the far right to talk and push patriotism in this country. And what I think is really remarkable is Nigel Farage has been at the front and centre of that push for patriotism in Britain, and we need to be more patriotic, we need to be proud of the flag, and we need to be proud of the country. But at the same time goes to America, talks shit about our country, talks the country down. There's allegations that he's trying to convince the United States presidents to hurt the country economically to suit his political objectives here. He's likened us to North Korea, talked about free speech laws. I mean, I don't know I don't know about you, but I'll give you my sense of so from a football perspective, as I often do on this
something
show,
I totally understand.
So I'm a Man United fan. We're deep in the dumps, by the way. We could not be more in the shit. I'm allowed to say that, but as soon as you say that, you're not allowed to. Right?
This is awkward because I'm actually, as well, although I don't love football, I am a Man United fan.
Okay, so let's put, someone else wouldn't
Sorry
be able
to ruin your
that,
analogy,
right? But it's in the same way that you can talk down something you love, but no one else can. But that seems to have completely gone out the window with Nigel Farage. So it's what I've called previously this plastic patriotism, where they douse themselves in flags and roll around in flags, and they'll have 16 flags up in their house, and they'll take all these pictures with the flags. But when it comes to true patriotism, which is standing up for the country, he goes into a foreign country's Congress, their houses of parliament, and talks down the country, shits on the country, likens us to North Korea, and again, allegations that he's trying to get economic sanctions put on the country, and no one's talking about patriotism.
Yeah, and I think it's when we talk about patriotism, right? I think this is pretty common when we see the type of patriotism that Farage has, where really, surely true patriotism would be supporting, British people as much as possible. Things like higher minimum wage, a better NHS, things that he just will never actually make any commitments to. And on the free speech issue specifically, I think it is important to bring up that, he's doing this, free speech tour of America whilst a Nottinghamshire council, which is controlled by the Reform Party, has effectively barred the local paper, I believe it's called the Nottinghamshire Live, from interacting with any councillors or with the council in any regard.
Yeah, and he got done for that in Congress, didn't he? One of the Democratic, the ranking member on the committee.
I think it was Jamie Raskin.
Let's say yes. And he really took him to task about how he has banned journalists from Reform UK's own conference. in a way that British journalists haven't really had a go at.
That's
Nigel
the thing.
Farage.
People always talk about like, oh, American journalists be more like British ones. They really go to task. But how often do we see someone in the UK really actually, push him on the things that he says? I mean, I said Jamie Raskin because I've got a quote here from in front of him. He dubbed Farage a Putin-loving free speech imposter and a Trump sycophant. I mean,
Yeah.
When's the last time you see someone on the BBC actually, or on any sort of media, really push what Nigel Farage gets away with?
Yeah, and by the way, we should mention that he took a very smiley photo that apparently I tweeted about, but I don't remember.
I had to remind you.
So he's taken a very smiley photo with Douglas Carswell, Carwell or Carswell, I don't know how to pronounce the name, but who cares? Mm-hmm. He who also tweeted that something from Epping to the sea, we should make Britain Abdul free, which is, in my view, a very openly racist tweet that Nigel Farage took a very smiley picture next to him after this tweet came out and has been making the rounds. So and by the way, Douglas Carswell, who is clearly, I think, implying in his tweet that there's too much immigration in this country, is currently an immigrant in the United States. He lives in America.
Oh, right. Well, then.
Yeah. Couldn't make it up.
You couldn't. It's almost like they're more concerned with the colour of someone rather than what different land they've come from, Yeah. I don't know. Maybe. Allegedly.
We'll keep an eye on Douglas Carswell and Nigel Farage as the days and weeks come on as well. Angela Rayner. So Angela Rayner's under fire after admitting that she underpaid stamp duty on her second home in Hove. Just today, the words tax evader were daubed on the side of her flat. She has increasingly come under a lot of pressure over the last couple of weeks. Most recently has been on this underpaying of stamp duty. So for folks who don't know, stamp duty is a tax that you have to pay when you purchase. I think everybody has to pay when you purchase a home. And there was questions as to what was her primary home and what was the secondary home. She gave a very long and thorough explanation today around how it involved the divorce from her now ex-partner and her son, who has a disability, I believe. But nonetheless, she's been hit with a wave of criticisms. What do you make of it?
It's an interesting one. I, as sort of someone who's been involved in politics on kind of both sides of the coin, have always found the sort of like personal politician issues the least engaging. When I read a story like this, I was this morning, I have a sort of list of all the lobby journalists and whatever they're sort of sharing, and I like to go through it. And it's just all about Angela Rayner's second home. And I just think, in line with what a couple of other politicians have been saying, I would much rather talk about, housing policy. I'd much rather talk about social care.
Do you know who said something really interesting? Is it Sir John Curtis? He was on one of the news channels, and I saw him say, how often do politicians resign as a result of personal failures? Yeah. And how often do politicians resign as a result of policy failures? Yeah. They almost always and exclusively resign because they've done something wrong from a personal perspective. But you never get a politician resigning as a result of serious policy failure. Yeah. And as we know, the reality is policy failure is what ultimately hurts everyday citizens of the country rather than personal ones.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is where sort of a real divide comes from a lot of people in the media and a lot of people in the general public. When people always talk about like people are too mean to MPs or they have a really tough job, I agree. People can be quite mean to an MP. However, if a swathe of MPs vote to cut disability, benefits at a time of a deep cost of living crisis, that's something that should be criticized heavily and should be really, really taken to task. When it comes to their personal life.
It has become a real thing of MPs complaining about
I mean,
how tough their lives are.
Yeah, which is, and it is a tough job. Apparently, I worked for one. It seemed difficult.
Yeah, fair enough.
But there's that level of like, oh, we have to separate. They're just doing their jobs, and it's like, no. This is an active decision that you took with probably as much information as any human being can have, and you chose to take one. People are going to be mad about that. Politicians should be criticized heavily for their policies, whether it's on Gaza, whether it's on disability benefits. And I don't think they should be able to hide behind, whatever sort of concerns that they have. But when we talk about this sort of issue, the media sort of classes always get obsessed with like a personal failing, a bit of drama, whereas they'll never take someone to the same level of task for a policy that caused X amount of people to fall into poverty, right?
Yeah, and you never get resignations as a result. And I thought John Curtis was quite astute about that, because I hadn't really thought about when was the last time a politician resigned as a result of a policy failure. On this Angela Rayner story, I will say it stinks to me.
Oh yeah,
because if we think about the level of scrutiny that she's had and the stories that have been placed about her over the last couple of weeks, everything from she was pictured on a boat while she was on holiday vaping on this boat that ended up on the front page of newspapers, all the way to these tax affairs and stories about her personal life all throughout the summer. I don't want to get conspiratorial, and I didn't bring my tinfoil hat, but what I will say is, having been in this game for a really, really long time, over a decade now, this stinks to me as a coordinated campaign. Now, that doesn't mean she doesn't have serious questions to answer on stamp duty. That doesn't mean that she hasn't done something wrong, something that needs to be amended. Obviously, there is a real story that should be reported on the stamp duty stuff. But when I look at it in totality, the way that she's had almost a media campaign run against her, it stinks to high hell. And I have theories, but I won't say them on air yet. But when it does happen, I want everyone to come back to this episode, because I'll claim I knew what it was.
Of course. Well, no, so thankfully, I am wearing a regular hat today, but it is lined with tinfoil, so I am protected from
There's lots of conversations around about
control.
Your hat in my ear currently by other producers. But
don't worry about it. The other producers, they don't know.
They don't know fashion like you know fashion.
I have changed my outfit about 4 times today, ready for this.
Let me ask you a question before
please.
Stay on Angela Rayner before we come to your fashion. Peter Kyle went on TV and said one of the reasons she's getting this scrutiny on this is because of her accent and where she's from. And there's that if this happened from a Tory MP, many of whom own second houses, that this wouldn't be such a big issue. Do we think that's true?
I think there's something to be said for it. It definitely comes from somewhere. I mean, I saw some horrible AI generated video of Angela Rayner dressed up in tracksuits, doing some sort of.
I saw that as well.
Yeah. And it's there's undeniable that sort of fervor from certain people who they see a working class woman with an accent and they go, they just go, oh yeah, she's a chav, great, we get to take the mick out of her, right? Or when we see people brief around Angela Rayner, it's always that same kind of horrid kind of.
There does seem to be there's definitely a level of misogyny, there's definitely a level of classism around her in general.
Yes.
Right? And this idea that and even before the stamp duty stuff came out, there were stories about her owning second homes and things like that. And there seemed to be a sort of vitriol as to how dare this northern working class woman own a second home. And, look, I don't believe MPs should be landlords and should own second homes, but that's a separate point. There does seem to be a second double standard. I will say though, I think it's a bit of a stretch to say this stamp duty question is a classism question.
That's the thing. There's undeniably a story there, right? Where the classism comes into it is sort of the surrounding sort of element of it. I think you would have a much better time analysing sort of like we were talking about with the photo of her sort of on a boat vaping, or she's having a wine on holiday and people going crazy for that. That's undeniably just they see a woman, doing something and having fun on holiday, and then they go, great, time to attack.
I won't lie, I thought that vaping story was pretty gangster.
I thought it looked pretty cool.
Yeah, if I was her team, I would have leaned into it, to be honest.
You would have leaned into it?
I think so.
Get a sponsorship?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe not a vaping.
I've heard nothing bad, allegedly.
Maybe not a vaping sponsorship, though, Chris.
A boat sponsorship.
Yeah, but she's referred herself to the ethics committee, and I think we're going to hear back from that pretty quickly. It sounds like it could even be today. Although, what are we like? It's probably too late for today. But they'll definitely be hearing back from that, and her political life is definitely on the line. Certainly her deputy prime ministerial. I was trying to look today to see if Keir Starmer actually has the power, because there's been Kemi Badenoch at PMQ said that he should sack her, and from my weird nerdy understanding of the Labour Party rulebook, I don't think he can sack her.
Yeah, because it is an elected role, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a uniquely elected role, kind of like the leader. So the leader and the deputy leader are elected simultaneously.
Right.
And I don't think, because I think if that was possible, Jeremy Corbyn would have removed Tom Watson. Which is why, from memory, Jeremy Corbyn's administration was trying to get rid of the deputy leader position as a whole.
As
there
a
was
means
conversation
to,
as a means to get rid of
that
So I
issue.
don't think I'll double check the rule book. Someone in the comments will tell me I'm wrong.
Nerd.
Loser.
But you bunch of losers. Why are you listening to this?
But I don't think you can get rid of it. But the ethics question, the ethics advisor will get back on that. Listen, we've got much more coming up. We'll be joined by Zoe Gardner, researcher and campaigner, to help us understand the government's immigration crackdown. That's next on Politics Uncensored. You're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Ali Milani.
And me, Hugh Smiley.
Hugh, is that your real name?
That is indeed my real name.
Sounds like a Batman character before his villainous arc.
Yeah.
As Parliament returned from recess at the start of this week, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper announced that they have suspended all applications to bring family members to the UK under the asylum system. Joining us now to help us understand this and more conversations around immigration in general is researcher and campaigner Zoe Gardner. Zoe, thank you for being with us. I'm a big fan. What is going on in the world? Like...
Wow.
Not about immigration, just generally.
No warm-up questions, just right in there.
Yeah,
What's wrong?
I tell you, Zoe, because I've wanted you on the show for a while, so help me understand this. I was just explaining to Hugh that other than, let's put Zack Polanski, because he's just been elected, to one side, there seems to be a general consensus in the political system about immigration, whether that's the Labour parties, we've removed more people than anyone ever in the history of people and removing, or it's Nigel Farage wanting to deport everybody, including you and Hugh, to Kemi Badenoch. I swear I'm as right-wing as Reform. I really promise I am. There does seem to be a general consensus around immigration, and anyone who dares veer out of the framing that immigration is a terrible thing is kind of shouted down.
Yeah, there's some kind of fascist derangement syndrome going on, essentially.
Fascist derangement syndrome. That's my next T-shirt that I'm going to make.
FDR.
For real. There is a huge, there's basically the three major parties, or at least the three major parties that get attention and are polling highly and so on, although they're polling lower than they would like to be in many cases.
That's the first time Keir Starmer's been told he's polling highly.
That's true.
That's a win, baby.
I guess it's just Reform that's polling highly. Yeah. But they are, all three of them, competing for the same 35% of the vote that the media has decided are the only 35% of the country that matter or should have a voice. And I was thinking about this really seriously because I was on a much less interesting or exciting program, the Moral Maze, yesterday on Radio 4, and they were talking about whether the media bears any responsibility for the rising sort of far-right anti-migrant sentiment, or whether they're just purely reflecting things back. And you had people honestly arguing on there that, like, the media are simply reflecting the reality, and this is all just comes, the public sentiment entirely comes first. And I think that you've got to be, well, that's why I say that you've got to have some derangement syndrome to believe that. Or, like, I don't think that they were, far be it from me to call them liars, but intellectually fully honest, maybe not. But there is an issue here where there was clearly some kind of reckoning after Brexit, I think, where a lot of liberal people who work in the media thought, oh God, we got it wrong. Oh God, we didn't see that coming. Oh God, we need to be much, much better. And it can't be caught with our pants down again. We can't be caught not emphasizing, the voice of people who dislike immigrants. And that has fed on itself. And it has become a situation where people in the media, in the progressive commentariat, and across supposedly progressive political parties have completely lost their, what am I allowed to say, their guts.
You can swear as much as you want. We are uncensored.
They have totally lost their bollocks. And they no longer dare to make the case that xenophobia is bad, racism is bad, a blanket opposition to migration is not an acceptable position to hold, that mass deportations are barbaric, and so they are failing utterly to represent the large majority of the country, which still, incredibly, despite all of this propaganda, does believe in a humane and well-managed immigration system.
Yeah, and I think, so to a certain extent, it reminds me a little bit of the 2008, post-2008 conversation when there was a consensus across political parties and in the media that the reason that we hit the economy crashed in 2008 was as a result of overspending by the government. Exactly. And they repeated it and they repeated it and they repeated it to the point where everybody believed it, right? And so when Ed Miliband went on Question Time during the 2015 election and they asked him whether the last Labour government had overspent, and he said no, which was the right answer, or their overspending resulted in the economic crash, and he said no, which was the factual correct answer, the entire audience gasped. And it felt like that's when he lost the election, because everyone was like, how can you say that?
So out of touch?
And it feels like the same thing is happening in immigration. When the media and all the mainstream political parties constantly batter the public with the reason the country's in the state it's in is because of immigration, it's a bad thing, then of course the narrative becomes that from the general population. Although, again, the polling is suggesting it's not a majority. How badly do we need a political figure to make the positive case for immigration?
Oh, desperately. So desperately. And I am really excited about Zack, because I and I'm going to just say this publicly now, and I hope I'm not proven to be a naive idiot, but I trust him. I think he really believes in what he's saying about migration, and I think he will say what he believes on migration, which is an extraordinarily rare thing in a politician. I don't think he'll triangulate on it. I don't think he'll throw migrants under the bus. I think he'll stand on those principles. And I think that just that will already be so much. I'm not saying it's going to be enough to change everything and so on. I'm not, not that naive, but it is so important that somebody is presenting the other side and reminding people that there is another side to be presented. Because what we really, really have to get back into the, mainstream media mindset is that that first of all, that like a huge amount of the population is just not being represented in this conversation. And also, it's the classic thing, like folks who work on climate will complain about, you'll present the scientific consensus as one side of the argument, but this dude reckons it might not be true on the other side of the argument. And currently, I'm consistently having to go in and bat for the fact that yes, the country does need immigration. Fact. We've not been having enough.
Can you do that? So can we, off the top of your head, and I'm not expecting some super well thought out academic answer, but what's the positive case for immigration?
Well, listen. The first case I would say is that it's just simply realistic. It's fantasy and a really dark, sick fantasy to believe that you can end immigration or even massively reduce it, right? People move since the dawn of people. And it is the single best survival behavior that we have developed is the ability to migrate from where we cannot live to places where we can live, where our children can live, where there will be safety, stability, a future opportunity. That is what people do, and it is what people will always do. And there is not a politician, there is no Nigel Farage that you can elect. It's never going to happen. They elected a full-on fascist Meloni in Italy. She's increasing immigration visas. It ain't going to happen that you're going to stop people from moving. You can sometimes redirect flows. You can make changes in the temporary term, but people will move. The UK colonized a huge part of the world. You can feel how you like about that, right? You can feel happy about it. You can feel bad about it. You can feel ambiguous about it. But the fact is, it happened, and that means that we have indelible, long-lasting, generations-long ties to countries all over the world where they speak English, where they recognize and feel comfortable within our culture, and where they have communities who are well integrated and thriving and long established in the UK.
Yeah, communities and familial ties,
And that simply means that A, people move, and B, we are a destination where, people from all over the world have community. Hence, we will be a destination for migration. The other side of it is that we have a disastrous demographic crisis facing us, right? We have just simply not been having enough babies.
But I don't think people understand just how catastrophic the birth rate problem is in this country and how bad it's going to get.
Absolutely.
So the basics of it is that there are not enough people having not enough kids, and as a result, the workforce in the UK is shrinking rapidly.
Yeah, and we're living longer,
and
right?
we're living
which
longer.
is great.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
But we have a very aging population, which means that we have more old people than we have young people, and that's a terrible, terrible thing for the economy.
Increasing care costs, then requiring more people to be of working age, then pay taxes to support them, and then it all spirals out.
Yeah,
exactly. You want a pension if you're around our age, and you want a pension, you best believe that it's going to be migrants working who are going to provide you with it. And that's just a simple fact now. We haven't just stopped having babies now. We've not been having babies at replacement rate for decades. And just last week, and this didn't make the news because nobody wants to talk about this, the ONS published, the lowest birth rate figures on record. And that's the third year running that we've had the lowest birth rates on record. We've gone down to 1.4 per couple. That means, the ability to pay pensions, the ability to maintain a welfare state, to have an NHS is entirely dependent for the next 30 years at least on immigration to the UK.
Yeah, because there's a whole moral case which we can talk about, and maybe we will talk about. There is a legal case, really. We'll talk about our relationships with foreign countries. But as far as I see it, just from an economic perspective, the real choice is: do you go down the deportation, I think net negative migration, which is what my mate Rupert Lowe has been talking about,
Jenrick said he agreed today.
Yeah, Robert
absolutely insane.
So you can be a very poor, isolated country with very few immigrants, or you can be a rich, prosperous country with a lot of immigrants. There is no choice in between.
Yeah, you can. And the other thing is, what has to come first? The economic downturn has to come first, because you can have no or even negative net immigration to this country, sure, but you have to have a massive economic collapse first, because we have to not have any jobs. Like, Argentina, I'm going to get these dates slightly wrong, but it's roughly between 2004 and 2014, had the most open immigration system that the world has ever seen, in my opinion, since the advent of borders and nations and so on. And like, you had the right to the welfare state, you had the right to free education, you had the right to citizenship, family, everything. And they had negative net immigration overall during that period. Why? Well, because the economy was a basket case, because there were no jobs, because there was rampant corruption, because there was huge inflation. And people don't go to places where they won't have stability, they won't have opportunity, they won't have a future. People do go to places where there is opportunity and is a future for their kids. And that is... Yeah. That's just a simple fact. So immigration will happen to the UK because we need it. And we have two choices, exactly as you say. We can manage it incredibly poorly as we're managing it now, and we can manage it with, really dystopian shit like, warehouses and camps and deportations.
And boats.
Or we can manage it humanely and well and in the best interests of our communities.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things also we've been talking about on the show a lot is there's been a lot of conversations around what migrants get when they get here, what refugees and asylum seekers get when they get here, the hotels and stuff like that. The simple answer to that is to allow them to work, which the government does not allow them to do. Yeah. So what do you expect people to live on the street and in poverty, which, by the way, you will then complain about because you'll say there's all these black and brown folk on my streets, like sleeping rough.
That's it.
Or whether we give them the right to work and to contribute and to actually help the economy, and also give them the dignity to live. I want to ask you, what time is moving so quickly because you're so good. I want to talk about the foreign policy element, because that's often ignored, right? People like Nigel Farage and Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch will decry why so many people are coming here, but ignore that the list of countries these people are coming from include Sudan, Eritrea, Iraq, Afghanistan, now maybe some from Gaza, but very, very few are actually coming from Gaza. And what do these countries all have in common? They're either in civil war and in conflict, or we're the ones who fucking pushed them there.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So you cannot, on one side of your mouth, support bombing places into oblivion and forcing refugee crises on countries, including Syria, for example. And then on the other side of your mouth say, we need to stop these people coming here.
Well, 100%. I mean, I spoke to an Iraqi refugee a little while ago, and he told me that, we've got to look at this in the long term. It's not just he who was bombed out of his home. It is 3 generations back of his family were bombed out of their homes by Western bombs, right? And this is a key thing, because it's not just as causal as, like, obviously, like when there's, the civil war in Sudan, which is beyond horrific, that displaces massive numbers of people. But it displaces them largely in the immediate term within the country or to the neighboring country. What causes longer term displacement over long distances is the long-term protracted instability that we have created, and that goes beyond just the places where we've been involved in the last decade. That goes like our fingers are in every pie on the globe. And that is, that's the other side of what I was saying before about those connections that we have to countries which were previously part of the British Empire. It's like, these are places that we not only forged those connections with, but also created, we massively impoverished, that we massively
and we benefited from, by the way.
Of course.
One of the reasons, if you just look at things objectively, Britain should not be one of the top 10 economies in the world, given the size of the country, its location, and the resources available. The reason we have such a strong economy, or we did, is because of empire, right? And whether I'm going to go with your line, whether you agree with it, disagree with it, or whether you're ambiguous to it or ambivalent to it, the reality is that we benefited from empire, and we can't now
we can't now
blame.
We can't, and we continue to benefit from that legacy and from those forms of extraction that we continue to operate through global capitalist systems, which are not an area which I'm going to be able to explain with like beautiful sentences like I can on migration, but we continue to benefit hugely from the arrival of migrants and from the fact that they come largely into communities that are ready to welcome them and ready to support them and ready to help them get into jobs and to learn the language. And
the reality, and this is some of the lies that happen when we talk about immigration in this country. First of all, this conversation about why are they all coming here, why don't they go to neighbouring countries? 80% or 85% of refugees do go into neighbouring countries. In Syria, for example, the vast majority of refugees went into Turkey or into Iran, for example. But the real reason why some refugees are crossing Europe to come here is exactly what you said. There's a connection through empire, there's a connection through language, there's a connection through family, and there's a connection through communities. That's why my family came here.
Of course, and that's why anybody would do it. And we all know, and the part of it that sickens me in this debate so much is the people who go, "Oh yeah, I understand. I'd do the same if I was them," but they can't do it. It's like, well, you can't have both those sides. If you can see why this is a necessity, something that you would risk your life for, then you're going to have to accept that it's a reality that you cannot prevent from happening, and that you need to, and you can, what you can do, evidence shows us, you can manage this well in ways that benefit our communities so much more.
Zoe, thank you so much for joining us. You've been brilliant. I'm sure we'll definitely have you more on. Very quick, in like 10, 15 seconds, there's a huge debate going on in FUBAR right now about Hugh's hat and whether he's pulling it off. Do you think he's pulling it off? Or not? That's a no. That's Zoe Gardner, researcher and campaigner, who has helped today to talk us through the government's policy and conversations around immigration. Coming up after the break, we'll be speaking to James Meadway on Labour's tax troubles, from Angela Rayner's flat to Rachel Reeves' budget. More after this. Well, joining us now down the line is economist James Meadway to break down Labour's tax conundrum. James, thank you so much for joining us. We have now pretty much got pretty strong rumours, if not confirmation, that there's a budget to be expected around October. And there are so many conversations / anxieties from, not me, from some folk about increases in taxes, whether that's replacing stamp duty with an annual property charge, capital gains tax on property sales, and so much more. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of what we might expect to be in Rachel Reeves' budget as it pertains to tax in October?
Sure, no problem. And thanks for having me. I think it's actually been confirmed now, I think the Treasury have just put out a date, and it's really late this year. It's like the end of November or mid-end of November. Top of my head is like 20th, something like this.
November 26th, I believe.
Yeah, there you go. Which is really late. And the reason it's so late is because the government's in a bit of a pickle. So the longer they can leave this, the more they can hope that something might turn up and things will look better mysteriously by then. Part of that pickle is exactly this issue of they need to find some money. They are deeply unwilling, and rightly so, I think, to try and push through more cuts, although you'll notice Keir Starmer, as part of his phase 2, probably about third or fourth or fifth relaunch the government's had, is talking about potentially going for welfare benefits again. But they're pretty wary about doing this after being unable to convince their own backbenchers, quite rightly, that some of the poorest people in the country should take the hit for the government's sort of failure to manage the economy properly. So they're going to be looking at tax rises, and they're really loath to do anything that would, as they said in their manifesto and they said in the election campaign last year, hit working people and hit workers. Now, I think they're right to try and frame it like this, but it means the sort of stuff they're scrabbling around after is, as you've said, changes potentially to capital gains tax. This is the tax that you pay typically if you're better off, to be honest with you. That's who it tends to hit. If you sell a second home, if you sell a very precious antique, if you sell one of your immense collection of vintage sports cars, if you sell some options or a couple of shares you might happen to have, that's when you pay capital gains tax. Most people don't really see it. So they're looking at that. Potentially another one is increases in taxes on landlords, that you would have to pay national insurance contributions on rent you get from renting out a property. There's a lot of landlords in Britain now, actually. It's like 2.5 million. It's some crazy figure like this. But it's not everyone. And obviously for a lot of people who rent, who have no great love for their landlords, they're not going to care too much about that. That's where the thing is kind of ending up at the minute. The problem they've got is that all of these things are relatively small compared to what may be a very large amount of money they need to find.
James, I've seen Richard Bergen, who's an MP on the left of the party this week, call again for a return to Labour values and for a wealth tax to be introduced, something around land tax as well. Any of that at all possible?
It would be great if it was. I just don't think it will be. I think the demand for a wealth tax, which has really gained huge amount of prominence over the last year or so. Campaigners like Gary Stevenson the former trader, the patriotic millionaires, this group of wealthy people saying you should be taxing us properly. Politicians like Richard Bergen and Zack Polanski have been raising it. And it's got a head of steam because people can see the inequality, right? They can see what's happened to their own pay relative to the price of basic stuff like rent or food or, frankly, electricity, gas, loads of stuff you need to survive. And they can see a few people doing very, very well. And they're right to see that because that is what's happened to inequality. We do not tax wealth properly in this country. So the demand has been to introduce a tiny tax, really, a 2% tax on wealth over £10 million.
Do we know how much that would generate?
Yeah, the figures doing the rounds are, I mean, it wobbles around a bit because you have to sort of do an estimate of this, but the usual figure from tax experts is that this could be £24 billion if you do it properly. And that's allowing for the fact that some of these wealthy people try and, readjust some of their holdings of wealth. So that's about £24 billion.
And how much
over 10 million.
And how much are we expecting? Let's say there is a change in capital gains tax or change in stamp duty. Is that the same sort of figures or less?
Not really. This is the problem the government's up against, is that, look, push comes down to shove. I think they've been very heavily lobbied, and we know they've been heavily lobbied because it's reported by the city, by financial interests, that they are far too close to far too many wealthy people, and they will not be looking at this stuff. And they also don't want to take on what we know is going to be a hue and cry for certain sections of the press about this sort of thing. So they're not going to do that. They're going to go for a load of smaller stuff. And the sums you're talking about from, say they do the national insurance contribution on landlords, it's like £1 billion, £2 billion, colossal sums of money for URI, basically peanuts relative to the amount that the government has coming in. Bear in mind that the situation they're looking at, and these are the fiscal rules operating that Rachel Reeves set herself. So a lot of this is kind of self-inflicted, but potentially the National Institute of Economic and Social Research says they might need to find £50 billion in the budget. Now that is on the upper end of what's likely to happen, but it could happen, and that's a lot bigger than the 1 or 2 billion you might get from some little fiddly changes here and there.
Yeah, James, on a wealth tax, I feel like whenever it's mentioned, there's sort of two camps of people, right? There's those of us on the left who go, wealth tax is great. It obviously makes sense. It's going to raise a lot of money and it targets people who can, bear the most weight. And then we look at anyone on sort of the other side of the economic spectrum, and it's almost like instantly disregarded, like a thought-terminating cliche. They hear the phrase wealth tax and they go, that's a load of nonsense, you're chatting rubbish. What do you actually say to someone who just disregards the concept of wealth tax, immediately just saying, it won't work, they'll just run off?
A couple of things on that. I mean, look, the first one, the broader picture is you're getting this pushback because they're worried, because they know it's a popular demand. I mean, you're talking opinion polling supermajority supporting this because people can see the inequality. So that's the first bit. So if you're getting a lot of pushback in this, it's because the other side are worried, and that's what's going on here. On the specifics of that argument, there's two things really. Look, the first one is the evidence we have is that actually the international wealthy people are not that mobile. Like, they quite like being in London. They quite like being able to send their kids to some of the the private schools that we have here. They like going to their clubs. They like going to the opera, whatever else it is. If you're in London, you're very wealthy. So they don't move that much. And we know this from the evidence of other countries that introduce wealth taxes. Spain's a really good example where they actually have a pretty well-functioning wealth tax, raising significant sums of money since about 2011 now. And it's not the case that the wealthy have all fled Spain. It's not the case, by the way, that Spain suddenly damaged economically.
Okay.
The Economist magazine was saying it's the fastest growing economy in Europe last year.
James, okay, thank you. So, I'm sorry, we've run out of time, but we're definitely a super interesting chat, and we'll love to have you back on to talk about this, but there's some really interesting conversation there. That's it from Politics Uncensored today. You can stay up to date with the show by following at Politics Uncensored UK on social media, where you can find me at Ali Milani Live.
And you can find me at Hugh Smiley 1.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back and catch up at FUBAR Radio or via the FUBAR Radio app.
Download it from your app store now.
Thanks for listening. See you next week for another episode of Politics Uncensored.